including tourism and reduce of consumer activity, huge reduction of consumer activity. Anyway, our uh, esteemed, renowned uh, uh, source person, Professor Ovirup Sarkar, will elaborate in his very simplistic and very lucid way. I think, and that is his lecture is so favorite to me. And that's all. Thank you all. Thank you, the uh, organizing committee and the department head of the Department of Economics. Thanks all.
Now I request Professor Shubir Chandra Dashgupta, convener IQAC Maulana Azad College, to convey his message regarding the webinar. I request Professor Subhash Chandra Dashgupta to convey the message.
Good morning, respected principal, distinguished speaker, Professor Ovirup Sarkar from Indian Statistical Institute, Dr. Kunal Dasgupta from Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, Professor Shantanu Ghosh, convener, all faculties, all participants, and dear students. Myself, Dr. S. Dasgupta, coordinator of IQAC Maulana Azad College, welcome all of you this one-day national webinar on the COVID-19 economic crisis, jointly organized by the Department of Economics and IQAC Maulana Azad College. The world is facing humanity's biggest crisis since World War II. Almost every country has been affected by the devastating coronavirus disease. Undoubtedly, this coronavirus has put the world economy at a major risk. Coronavirus ravaged the economic foundations of the world trade. In the present scenario, this webinar will highlight the economic issue and its effect due to COVID pandemic. So we are all eager to listen from the resource person's mouth. At the end, I again welcome all of you this today's webinar.
Well, before we start the session, I request all the participants to switch off their speaker and camera. And please do not present your screen. It is requested by viewers to pin the account of the speaker. Finally, after the lecture by our eminent speaker, there will be a short question answer session. All our viewers in GMeet and YouTube are requested to communicate via the chat box and not verbally. I repeat, all the questions are to be asked via the chat box and not verbally. Now, Professor Shantanu Ghosh, Head Department of Economics, Maulana Azad College, will introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Bipasha Roy. Welcome all the participants and the distinguished speaker. On behalf of the Maulana Azad College, I welcome you all to this webinar. Professor Ovirup Sarkar is one of the most distinguished economists and speakers. Professor Sarkar obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from Presidency College, Calcutta, and a master's from the University of Calcutta. He did his PhD from the University of Rochester, USA, and has spent most of his academic career at the Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta, from where he has recently retired. He has also taught and researched at various other places in India and abroad, including the University of Florida, USA, Brigham Young University, USA, Concordia University, Canada, International Center for Economic Research, Italy, and the Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. The primary areas of his research are international trade and economic development. Apart from contributing to scholarly journals like the International Economic Review, the Journal of Development Economics, the Journal of International Economics, and Economica, he regularly writes popular pieces in dailies and periodicals. He was the chairman of the Fourth State Finance Commission of West Bengal and the present chairman of the Sixth Pay Commission of the state. He also chairs the West Bengal Infrastructure Development Finance Corporation as well as West Bengal Financial Corporation. Professor Sarkar is a member of the Technical Advisory Committee of the Reserve Bank of India and a former member of the group of advisors to the Union Finance Minister on G20 matters. We are really privileged and proud to have Professor Ovirup Sarkar among us. On behalf of the Maulana Azad College and the Department of Economics, we again expressed our deep gratitude and thank to Professor Sarkar for kindly consenting to deliver his lecture in today's webinar. I think I should now hand over the proceedings to Professor Sarkar without delaying further. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. I thank Maulana Azad College. I thank Professor Subhashish Dotto, Professor Shantanu Ghosh, and other faculty members of the Economics Department for giving me this excellent opportunity to share with you my thinking on the current crisis. There are many open questions. I shall not pretend that I have answers to all of them. But what I'll do is I will share my concerns. I will share what I feel the problems are. I will suggest some solutions. But as I said, not to all problems. I have a ready solution. I will be talking about the economic crisis associated with COVID-19 and the corresponding government action, public action. What is the government doing about it? Is it the right way to follow? Or should we say that there were other means that the government should have taken? So first, I will talk about the crisis, and then I will talk about public action or government action. Now, we can divide the economic problem associated with COVID-19 into two parts, or rather into two periods. One is the lockdown period, the complete lockdown period, where the basic problem for many is the problem of survival. And then the second part, the second period, where lockdown is being gradually relaxed and the country is struggling to come back to normalcy, that I will call it a period of revival. So there are two periods, one of survival and one of revival. Now, when we talk about the lockdown period, where many citizens are struggling to survive, they have been locked down, they have been cut off from their places of employment, they cannot provide the labor which was earning them their daily bread. For these people, survival is the main problem. Now, associated with this problem was another possible problem which did not crop up, Why? I will tell you why. But another possible problem that could have cropped up is one of hoarding. You see, suddenly there was this lockdown so that um, commodities became in short supply. Go downs, well, they had some stocks, but it was likely that after a while, these stocks would be depleted. And in apprehension of that, usually there are, speculative attacks and so on. Uh, but we did not notice such activities. So the survival problem was there, but the hoarding problem was not there. So let us see why there was not so much of a hoarding problem. Of course, prices increased a little bit, but not much. The reason I think is that already a recession was going on. So, due to various reasons, before, the pre-COVID-19 period was already witnessing a recession. Now, typically in a period of recession, stocks get piled up. Commodities cannot be sold. So, godowns were already full of unsold stocks. And that was a boon in disguise. That sort of prevented people to hoard further, to, prevented people to from indulging into speculative activities. So the recession that preceded COVID-19 was, in my opinion, in some sense, was a boon in disguise because we had enough stocks to tide over the lockdown period. Now the problem of survival, as far as survival is concerned, we are talking about poor people, people who are employed in the informal sector, who do not get to eat enough. Now, for them, this is one kind of problem. The other problem was related to the migrants. Now, as far as people, so far as people who were non-migrants, but who were locked down in their villages without jobs, without income, and without much savings, for them, I think the governments, both the central government as well as the state governments, did a fairly good job of distributing food through the public distribution system. They were already getting 7 kilograms of rice at 2 rupees a kilogram in 1 month. In addition to that, 5 kilograms of rice, this is per head, and 1 kilogram of dal was provided to the poor free of cost. So each person would now get 12 kilograms of rice and 1 kilogram of dal. Part of it was free. And that sort of helped tide over the crisis. If we remember the Bengal famine, for example, there was no such public distribution system, and lots of people died of starvation. In this present crisis, we did not see that many people dying of starvation. There could be one or two here and there, but those, I think, would be exceptions. So I think the governments, both the central government and the state governments, did a reasonably good job of providing food for the poor so that they could survive. This is one part. The other part, however, is about the migrants, and we all know that the policy regarding the migrants was faulty. They should have been allowed to go back before the lockdown had started. So there, I don't think the government did a good job. the policy or the planning could have been carried out at a much more efficient level. So that is all I have to say about the survival period, the period of lockdown. My main, um, the main talk would be concentrating on the, the post-lockdown period, where the economy is uh, trying to revive, is struggling for a revival. Now, what are the problems of revival? The COVID crisis was, to start with, a supply side shock. Now, one has to understand from a policy point of view whether it was a supply side shock or a demand side shock or both. Now, what I mean by that, I will explain, but it is important to understand whether it's primarily supply side or demand side, because unless we understand that, policies cannot be geared properly. They cannot be pinpointed to the problem which is of utmost importance. So we have to understand whether it's a supply side problem or a demand side problem. Clearly, problem started with the supply side. After the lockdown, what happened? Production stopped. Uh, People, you couldn't get labor to carry on production. Transportation was the big problem. So you couldn't get your raw materials. And as a result, contracts could not be honored. So typically what a firm does is a typical firm enters into a contract. It's going to deliver so many tons of goods within such and such time. Now, those contracts could not be honored because of lack of production, because of lack of transport, and so many other problems. Now, when you cannot honor a contract, you also do not get the payment that you were supposed to get. You're not delivering the goods, so you're not getting paid for the goods. Now, in such a situation, well, most firms, they take loans from banks and other financial institutions. And once they get money by selling their wares, they pay the installments of loans. So as soon as payment stopped, as soon as production stopped, as soon as sales stopped, the flow of money also stopped, and firms could not pay their installments. Now, typically, this is a problem. This is a huge problem for MSMEs, small and marginal and even medium-sized firms, who do not have a deep pocket. They don't have a lot of finance. So what they do is, to pay back one loan, they have to take one more loan from the market, and in the process, they enter into a debt crisis. And this is exactly what happened during the decentralization menace, I would say. Decentralization led to bankruptcy for a large number of small and marginal firms. Even medium firms, some of them had to go out of business because they entered a debt trap. They cannot pay back their loans, so they had to take a fresh loan, and they entered the debt trap. Similar things were likely to happen in the present scenario also, and probably at a much larger scale, on a much larger scale. So this was the problem, primary problem, and associated with it, when lockdown is lifted, there is the problem of reorganizing labor. You have to bring back your skilled labor who has gone back to his village. You have to get back your the person who drives your truck to transport your goods, who has also probably engaged in some other job in his village. Even trains, there was a train which was available to take this person back to his village, but now he can not come back very easily to his place of work. So all these problems are there. So there is a huge problem of reorganization. So these are all supply side problems. Problem of paying back your loan, problem of reorganizing your production. These are huge problems. Now these are of course supply side problems. Question is, if the government just concentrates on the supply side, just tries to solve the supply side problems, would that be enough? That would be enough provided there is no secondary demand side problem. Now, what is a demand side problem? Let me explain. Typically, demand side problem would arise where people do not have enough money in their hands so that they cannot buy goods. And since they cannot buy goods, firms have no incentive to produce, no incentive to hire people, and so on and so forth. So in a demand side problem, the problem starts from the demand side, starts from the fact that people are not buying. So the question is whether there is an additional demand side problem. Now, I'm just going into slightly deeper economics here. You know, those of you who have economics background will know that there is a thing called Say's law. What is Say's law? It says that basically when supply increases, supply of a commodity, or in the economy supply increases, it creates income. Because when you increase supply, you are producing more, and when you are producing more, you are hiring people, and when you are hiring people, you are generating income, and that income is spent on the good that you have produced. So supply creates its own demand. So if you go by the Say's law, named after J.B. Say, once you take care of the supply side, you don't have to worry about the demand side. Question is, can we remain satisfied with the supply side in the present scenario? Now, I think there are two reasons why the demand side has to be taken care of separately. There is a recent paper, unpublished paper, came out in April called Macroeconomic Implications of COVID-19. Can negative supply shocks cause demand shortages? It's written by Guerreri, Lorenzoni, Traub, and Werning of Chicago, Northwestern, Harvard, and MIT. And they argue that if you have two different sectors, let's say, suppose one sector is relatively doing well, but the other sector is hard hit by the crisis, then the hard hit sector can reduce the demand for the sector which was doing all right. So in a multi-sector framework, indeed, there could be secondary demand shocks originating from supply shocks. Let me, without getting more theoretical, let me give you a simple example from the Indian economy. Well, you see, if you look at the formal sector, the big industries, the big firms, they have deep pocket. Finance is not a problem for them. So the debt crisis that I was talking about does not apply to them that much. However, these days they sell their goods not only
to the cities, but also to remoter parts of the country. So the informal sector, consumers, they these days they are also buying goods produced by formal sector firms. If you look at mobile phones or soap or hair oil or all sorts of things, these are now produced by formal sector firms. The formal sector firms, they're not only selling to the formal sector consumers but also to the informal sector consumers. So if the informal sector income is affected, if the informal sector is badly affected because of the crisis and the reasons I just spelled out now, if the informal sector is affected, the formal sector cannot remain insulated. So that is one of the sources of demand problem. We have to take care of demand because one sector is clearly affected, namely the informal sector, namely the MSME, the medium, marginal, and small sectors. So there would be a general demand crisis, spillover. The other problem is what in economics we called a more Keynesian problem. It's a problem of investment. Well, you see, investment is made for the future, and it depends primarily on your perception about the future. Now, COVID-19 makes things very, very uncertain. Once the future is uncertain, the investors would rather wait for a while than investing right now. So it's likely that investment is going to go down in this period of crisis. Now, if investment goes down, then of course employment will go down. People who were supposed to invest, they were demanding goods which will not be produced, and therefore employment will go down in those sectors. And once employment goes down, through the multiplier effect, the people whose employment has gone down, they will not be spending on other goods, and demand for other goods will also go down. So this is the standard Keynesian mechanism through which demand can again play a role. Lack of investment. So the second channel is lack of investment. I can add a third problem, which is also Keynesian. The third problem is that in this period of crisis, there is likely to be a rise in speculative savings. You see, even consider a person who has a job, who is not out of job, but he is working in the private sector, and he knows that there is a chance, there is a fairly good chance that he might lose his job in future. Under such circumstances, he is not going to spend much. Rather, he would try to save whatever little he has. Now, this savings, this refraining from consumption will reduce demand further. So the demand problem is very much there. It's coming from the supply side, all right, but it is also there. It needs to be taken care of separately. Now, what has the government done? Let's see. Our finance minister has announced a number of measures that she wants to take to tide over the crisis. Now, these measures, there could be you can broadly divide them into two parts. One is basically making loans available at cheaper rates, mostly to MSMEs, but she has uh, extended the definition of an MSME to 100 crore rupees, 100 crore turnover. So that would include a number of medium-sized firms as well. So these firms in the new policy regime that she has announced can get loans at a lower rates of interest. Now, we have argued that such loans are necessary. Certainly such loans are necessary, especially for the small and marginal units. Such loans are necessary. So that is something that we should say was required. But the problem is that, the question is that, is it going to be enough? If there is a demand problem, as we have argued, a firm, be it a small firm or a medium or a marginal firm, if the firm knows that the good that it is going to produce has no market because of lack of demand, then is it going to take a loan? Why should it take a loan? It will try to minimize its losses by not taking a loan, just by closing down business. That firm would argue that enough is enough, I have had enough, so let me close down the business, because even if I produce, I will enter into further losses. So, my point is that if the demand problem is also not taken care of along with the supply side, then the economy cannot revive. Now, how to take care of the demand problem? How to increase demand? Economists, some economists at least, including the recent Nobel laureate Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee, have argued repeatedly that there should be direct transfers, direct income transfers, money transfers to the marginalized. That will not only help the marginalized to survive, but also they will spend, and that expenditure would improve the demand situation in the country. Now, transfer of income, yes, that is, I would say that to a certain extent, it is perhaps required, but there are certainly problems of making huge transfers. Of course, you cannot, because the government is budget constrained, severely budget constrained, you cannot just keep on transferring income to a huge number of poor. There is a question of financing. We will come to the question of financing in a moment. But transfer, yes, to survive, to tide over a crisis, to help people survive, transfer is necessary. And of course, such transfers in the form of food through the public distribution system was there. But whether beyond that transfer is feasible is something that I have some doubt about. Because after all, the question is who will bear the burden of such transfers? Someone has to bear the burden. We will talk about that in due time when we talk about financing government expenditure. The other channel to increase demand is the usual channel of fiscal policy, that is increasing government expenditure on investments. Now, I think that is a much better channel from a long run point of view. You see, last year, if you remember, the Prime Minister's 15th August speech, he had he was dreaming of having a huge infrastructure for the Indian economy. So what he said was, for the next 5 years, we are going to build up infrastructure, and India is going to be um, a real economic force in the world scenario. Similar echoes were heard in the budget speech of the finance minister. He also talked about building up infrastructure. So why can't we spend money on infrastructure now? Why can't the government spend money on infrastructure? In fact, the Council of Economic Advisors to the Prime Minister has also advised the government to increase its infrastructure investment. But so far, that kind of expenditure is not forthcoming. It has not been announced as yet. Now, spending on infrastructure has two effects, two favorable effects. One is clearly it creates direct demand, it creates direct employment by hiring people, but also it increases the efficiency of the private sector as well because of an improved infrastructure. So if the private sector becomes more efficient because of better infrastructure, they will have the incentive to invest more. So there is a complementarity between public investment and private investment. If public investment increases, private investment is also likely to pick up. And that again will increase demand. One word of caution, because some sectors are still supply constrained because of lockdown, because of lack of labor availability and so on, the standard multiplier cannot work freely. Output of those sectors cannot increase. This is a standard problem in economics. If you have supply bottlenecks, the standard multiplier is going to be weaker. But in spite of that, I think it's a good idea to increase government expenditure on infrastructure. Finally, we will talk about financing of the crisis. Now, I was dividing the finance minister's suggested policies into two parts. One was, we just discussed, providing easier loans to a variety of firms. What is the other? The other, the finance minister says that it's one form of reform, structural reform, but basically it's a question of financing. He's talking about selling national assets like coal mines, airports, firms producing, government firms producing defense equipment, and so on and so forth. So, finance minister, according to the finance minister's speech, these are structural reforms. But if you look at it more closely, probably the finance minister is trying to raise money by selling these national assets. Now, if you take her word as she uttered them, that is, if you take this as reforms, then the question arises, is it the right time to go for reforms? certainly this is not the right time to go for reforms, because reform typically involves at least short-run loss of employment. And we are already in an employment constraint situation. So there is no reason why we should take further uncertainties about employment by going for reforms in this at this stage. So let us not talk about reforms. The other aspect of selling these national assets is basically selling these to get money so that you can finance the finance the expenditure that you have to undertake to tide over the crisis. So basically, it's an expenditure financing policy of selling national assets. Now, again, I think there are two serious problems of selling national assets at this stage. The process of selling coal mines has already started. Other processes are going to start. But this keeps one worried. Why? Because you see, now at present, we are going through a period where the whole world is going through a recession. Now, in this period of recession, how many good buyers are you going to get? Probably very, very few. So, the problem is that if you are trying to sell your assets in a period during a period of crisis, you are likely to get very low price for your assets. And selling national assets at a low price, means basically a loss to the citizens of India, because it's the citizens of India who are owning these assets. So this is not at all the right time to sell your assets. You should wait for economic pickup, economic revival for selling your assets. Now, of course, there are there are theories which would say that this is a way of letting some specific people to acquire assets at low prices. Some private players are being favored and all that. I will not go into that. Though the possibility cannot be, we cannot say that the possibility is not there. Possibility cannot be negated, but I won't go into that. But this much I can certainly say, that selling national assets at this point in time is not a good idea, because the government is going to get a very low price. The other problem is that if you are selling your assets, let's say coal mines, to a private person, to a corporate body, then the problem of unemployment is going to increase, because, well, you are selling them because they were not performing well, right? And in all possibility, there was overemployment in all these sectors. So this private person who is acquiring the assets is likely to lay down people. People will be laid off. I'm sorry, not lay down. Lay off people. And that will reduce the level of employment further. So selling of assets, getting money from that is not a good idea. I think we should go back to our traditional means of finance. Increasing supply of money can be done to a limited extent, carefully, because it will lead to inflation. Reducing interest rate cannot work in these circumstances, because typically reduction of interest rate means people assumption is that people will take more loans from the banks, and that will lead to money creation. But in these circumstances, even with lower interest rates, people are not going to take additional loans because of the gloomy economic situations. What the government can certainly do is to borrow. The government is telling everyone else to borrow, including the state government. The central government is telling everyone to borrow more. The state government's limits have been increased, limits of borrowing. So the central government itself should indulge into some more borrowing. That would give it some more funds. And finally, there is the option of increasing taxes, not for everyone, but for the super rich. That option is always there, but the government is reluctant to go for that option. Of course, we can, increase the taxes on the super rich. We can reduce the benefits that were given to the corporate sector. Corporate taxes were reduced in the last budget. That could have been increased. So, taxing the rich is an option, borrowing more is an option, and limited increase in money supply is another option, I think. And with that, I think I will stop. I've used up my 40 minutes, and I'll be very happy to answer questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your exuberant presentation. You have very well discussed about the demand side and supply side crisis. Due to the pandemic situation, we have to understand whether it is a supply side crisis or a demand side crisis to frame an appropriate policy. And you have explained very well that how our government should design its policy so that we can come out of this crisis situation and our Indian economy will survive and it will take the path of growth. And now I will ask our participant question to write their question in the chat box so that we can give it to our speaker. One more question is there, sir, from Snigdha Chaudhary. One question is there. She said that shortage of supply in sanitizer due to excessive increase in the demand. Are your views?
Okay. Should I respond now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. There could be certain goods where you could have supply bottlenecks. Sanitizer is one, then mask, N95 mask is another. There could be some medicines which could be in short supply. But I think these are relatively short-run problems, and once firms realize that there is a big demand for that, there is an excess demand, firms will increase their production. But one has to realize that just by producing sanitizers, an economy cannot make its revival. It has to produce all other goods as well. So sanitizer is only a small part of our national income, if not a minuscule part.
One question is there from Akash Boni. The government is trying to develop an import substitution policy. How viable is it?
Okay, you see, import substitution is going on all over the world. We are basically moving towards an anti-globalization phase. This is a exactly opposite to globalization, what we were witnessing before. Now, import substitution, it's not. I don't think it's feasible always. It's not going to be feasible. However, I have a very strong feeling about Chinese goods. We are too much dependent on Chinese goods. You see, if you look at the balance of payments between India and China, we are importing at least, I don't remember exactly the figures, but maybe 6 or 7 times what we are exporting to China. And in some crucial strategic sectors, we are heavily dependent on the Chinese goods, like power, for example. So that has to be substituted. There, just because of strategic reasons, there has to be import substitution. But in general, import substitution, I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't think it's feasible either.
One more question is there from Pooja Dhar. Can temporary investment tax credit help investment to boost?
I don't think so, because investment depends upon future profitability. A temporary investment credit will help um, to buy raw materials, perhaps. You can show it as your working capital investment. But if you are talking about long-term investment, people will certainly consider the long-term situation, um, the long-term perception of the economy. And there, I don't think any temporary investment credit will help.
Kamalani Mukherjee says, Sir, you stated that the initial complete lockdown was a boon in disguise for economy going into recession. So has the economy recovered? If so, wouldn't an increase in money supply cause unwarranted inflation?
I'm not sure if I understood the question. You see, what I said was, before the crisis, a recession was going on, and therefore there was piling up of unsold stocks. Now, these stocks helped us to tide over during the lockdown period. So there was no serious crisis, supply crisis of commodities, because already there were unsold stocks. So that is all I said. Now, about money supply, monetary policy, I didn't understand. What was the question again about money? Uh,
Has the economy recovered? If so, wouldn't an increase in money supply cause unwarranted inflation?
no, no, no. The economy has not recovered. Clearly, it has not recovered. It just helped us to tide over the crisis. The unsold stock helped us to tide over the crisis, but the economy is still in the deep, in a deep down recession. So it has not, recovered at all. And so far, we have not witnessed very high inflation. There are, inflationary pressures here and there on food and things like that. But so far, inflation is not a very serious problem, I would say.
Vishti Bonik has one question. Can printing of new money cure this situation?
Well, as I said, limited printing of money, new money, can help, but one has to be very, very careful. One has to put a restraint on how much money we are going to print, because if we are printing too much money, then we are heading for a runaway inflation, and inflation is a tax. It's a tax on everyone, especially on those who depend on their savings to basically I'm talking about elderly people who are depending on their savings for their they don't have any income. So it will definitely hurt the elderly people. Um, so one can increase money supply, but with a lot of caution.
Anubhav Das and Ritika Ghosh, both of them have similar questions. What are the consequences of privatization of Indian railways and commercial banks?
Yeah, that's a very, I would say, a loaded question. It's difficult to answer in a short time span. Um, you see, privatization of Indian railways, if you ask me, I can give my personal opinion. Maybe in the long run, privatization had to take place. If you look at other countries, uh, railways are run on a private basis, at least a part of them. But this is not the right time for privatizing because this will involve a lot of job loss, which we can ill afford. So this period of crisis is the worst time for privatization. This is number one. And number two, still our country is a poor country. We have to admit that. And Indian Railways, they're doing an excellent job of transporting poor people at a very reasonable price. Now, a private player who is taking over the Indian Railways will have no incentive to do that. So there will be a serious problem of transportation for the poor people. So that without thinking of an alternative for these people, the government should not go for large scale privatization. For example, in all metropolitan cities, a large number of people are coming to work from the nearby, areas using the local railways. If the local railways are privatized and prices go up, all these people will just, go out of jobs. They just cannot come to their place of work. So these things need to be considered. About banks, well, I will not answer because there are so many things to consider there. Maybe I will take some other opportunity to answer that. I'll write something about it, perhaps.
So there are a lot of questions. So may I ask, or I can give it to you by mail?
Yeah, please.
Let me ask one more question, and then I will stop here. Uh, Saptorshi Chakraborty has asked one question. By increasing the corporate tax in a short time after its reduction, won't it create bad faith towards government policies among industries?
Okay, you see, this increasing tax is happening. One must understand that if it happens at all, it would happen in a period of crisis. It's a special situation. So it does not affect the credibility of the government. Government cannot simply say that uh, whatever happens, I'm going to stick to this tax rate. Government can never say that. There are exceptional situations, and this indeed is an exceptional situation. And secondly, increasing taxes, corporate taxes, I don't think they're going to affect investment as such. Investment depends on perceptions about the future, profit perceptions, and that is quite bleak. So, that way, we, we need to um, improve the perceptions of the investors. There are other ways of doing
Thank you, sir. You are with us for a very long time, and I hope we have enlightened and from uh, your excellent presentation. And over to Bipasha.
it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Over to Vipasha. We have, I think, Vipasha is dealing with us.
শান্তনুবাবু
Ah,
আপনি আপনি করুন বিপাশা বোধহয় আউট অফ
okay. So sorry for the interruption. So on behalf of the Department of Economics and Maulana Azad College, I again thank Professor Sarkar for his excellent lecture. There are so many questions on the topic which it is obvious we cannot uh, clarify in a very short period of time. But in any case, he has lucidly explained the basic economics and has also touched upon a host of issues. And I hope many of our questions have been clarified, though we are still unsatiated, but we require another occasion to get all the answers for so many questions. And I hope we will be able to have Professor Sarkar again in near future. Thank you, Professor Sarkar. Thank you so much. Thank you all. Now we go to the second session. So we should now try to contact the second speaker. Ovirubda, you are still here?
Yeah, I'm still there, but I can go out now, right?
As you, we will be happy if you stay. As you, what is your convenience?
Okay. I will. Okay. I might have to go out now.
Okay.
But,
yeah. Any message? Final message you want to deliver?
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this excellent webinar.
Yes.
There are a lot of listeners. I'm overwhelmed, I would say, and I'd be very happy to get the questions that I did not have an opportunity to answer. I will try to answer them. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much. We are really grateful that you managed, in spite of your very busy schedule and at a very short notice.
No, this is fine.
Our students were very eager, and Ovirubda, we have participants not from Bengal but from Delhi, even from Jammu and Kashmir today.
Yes.
So they are eager to listen to your lecture, and I hope they have enjoyed. Certainly. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So, Parin Babu, now I try to contact the second speaker. I hope she is free by this time. Just give me 2 minutes time.
I'm already in.
Oh, you are already in?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Thank you. Welcome.
Yeah, I logged in a few minutes back.
Okay. So, Vipasha is there? Hello? So, I think instead of wasting time then,
yes, sir.
So I think I should introduce our second speaker.
Yes.
So, welcome, Dr. Kunal Dasgupta. We are really proud and grateful to you for kindly accepting our invitation at a very short notice. And we are really thankful because you had a long 2-hour session with your students. from 10:30 to 12:30, or maybe 10 to 12:30, more than 2 hours. And just with a break of 10 minutes, you have joined to deliver your lecture. So, dear participants, so it is a pleasure on my part and on the part of the Department of Economics, Maulana Azad College, Kolkata, to introduce to you a very young speaker, a very distinguished student of Presidency College and ISI Kolkata. Dr. Kunal Dasgupta is currently an Associate Professor of Economics and Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. Kunal completed he was my student in Presidency College. So Dr. Dasgupta completed his bachelor's degree from Presidency College, Calcutta, and then went to Indian Statistical Institute for master's. After completing his master's, she went to Princeton University, which is one of the top-ranked universities in the world, for his PhD. He completed his PhD from Princeton, and after finishing his PhD, he joined the University of Toronto, where he taught for several years. Dr. Dasgupta's research interests include international trade, economic geography, and macroeconomics. And after teaching in Toronto for several years, then Dr. Dasgupta decided to return to India and join the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. And she has published in various international journals and is actively engaged in research. Incidentally, one of our departmental students is a research assistant with Dr. Dasgupta, so it was easier for me to contact him at a short notice through our student. So I would not waste your time, and I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Dasgupta. Please, Dr. Dasgupta.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I just need to. So I'm going to use some slides. So I just need to figure this out because I'm not very familiar with Google Meet. So just give me a minute. Let me try to figure out how to share my slides. Okay. Okay, can you see the slides or?
I can see.
Okay. So if you can see, then I think everyone can see. Okay, all right, fine, fair enough. Yeah, thanks a lot. I mean, I think it's sort of a great.
Sir, it is not in the screen. Not on the screen, sir.
Sorry. Can you?
We're not observing the slide.
So there's some. So not everyone can see. Is that?
I can see.
Hello.
I can see it.
Hello.
Has it
Can
come
you
to
help?
your?
Vipasha, can you help? Hello.
Oh, it's okay now. It's okay.
It's okay.
Is it okay?
Participants are requested to
Yes,
kindly
yes.
pin the presentation screen of Dr. Dasgupta. Participants are kindly requested to pin the presentation screen of Dasgupta. There is another screen of Dr. Dasgupta which is showing his face, his video. So kindly pin his presentation screen for uninterrupted viewing of his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, is that? Should I go ahead or should I wait for a minute?
No, I think it's okay. I think everybody is able to view this.
Okay, now
Yes,
it's
sir.
okay.
You can
Yeah,
start.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
all right.
okay.
Yeah, so it's important because I'm going to
Thank
follow.
you. Thank you. That's okay.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, so again, sort of once again, thanks a lot. So yeah, I mean, I sort of so when Sir sort of contacted me last week, I was thinking of okay, what sort of things that I can talk about, and because sort of COVID-19 has pretty much touched our lives in a lot of different ways. So there are different various aspects, and in a place like I am Bangalore, a lot of my colleagues have been looking at sort of different aspects of COVID-19 and how it can affect how the government works, how it can affect how it will affect the government works, how it will affect how industries work, different industries work, so on and so forth. And and I have also been doing a little bit of work on that. So that's what. So I thought that okay, fine. Let me just talk about something that I'm sort of familiar with a little bit. Okay. So I decided to talk about COVID-19 and income inequality. Okay. So why this particular topic? So I mean, if you look at, I mean, it's been what, like, more than 4 months since, sort of the lockdown started, since we, really started taking COVID-19 seriously. And of course, in this past few months, a lot of research has been done, and I think it will continue to be done in the near future on, effects of COVID-19 on different, aspects of the economy. And there's been a lot of work done on GDP. So how COVID-19 could potentially affect GDP, not just at the aggregate level, but also at the sectoral level. So, and this has been done for every country. This has been done for India, and there's sort of this understanding that maybe some sectors of the economy might be more affected than some other sectors. And then the question is, okay, how can the government? What should the government do? How can the government help, and so on and so forth. So. So there's been a fair bit of work on this. Now, relative to this strand of work, much less attention, in my opinion, has been paid to income inequality. I mean, while we understand that maybe inequality could be affected because we see that the effect of COVID-19 is not the same on everyone, but sort of I wanted to kind of think more carefully about it and try to sort of get some insights from a model and sort of an economic model. So so that's what I'm going to do today, essentially. So my talk is going to be sort of focused on how the pandemic, sort of this ongoing pandemic, might shape income inequality. And this is, as I said earlier, so this is something I've been working on, started working on very recently, obviously, because it's sort of related to COVID. So it's based on, so whatever I'm going to talk about today is based on a working paper that I have with one of my colleagues at IIM Bangalore, Srinivasan Murali. So again, this is sort of a very this work is very preliminary. So the results that I'm going to show you are sort of very preliminary, but just but I think some of them are sort of are pretty informative about what or how COVID-19 might affect inequality, and I think they have some sort of interesting insights. Okay, all right. So so the first kind of point that I want to make is there is COVID-19 kind of has brought back this discussion about this this new labor market divide. So what do I mean by this new labor market divide? So if we sort of traditionally look at the labor literature, okay, the labor economics literature, like historically, the division that people sort of generally talk about is between high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers. Okay, so of course, I mean we have. I mean, if you look at the actual skills of workers in a country, then it's not like there are like two skills. There's a continuum of skills, but we can sort of broadly divide people into high skills and people into low skills. Now, and if you think about inequality, when we think about inequality, there's a very close relationship between income inequality and the skills. Okay, so inequality is not only a result of skills. So it's not just the case that why is someone rich and why is someone poor? It's not. It cannot be entirely explained by their underlying skills. There's a lot of other things. There are a lot of other factors. But skills are definitely important. Okay, so essentially if you look at the distribution of income in a country, if you try to measure income inequality in a country, there would be a pretty close relationship between that and the distribution of skills. So in countries where you have the skills are kind of pretty evenly distributed, income will also be pretty evenly distributed. I mean, or in countries where this distribution of skills is very, very unequal, income will also be very unequal. Okay? And there's a tremendous amount of evidence that sort of suggests that this is the case across countries over time. Okay, so now what happened? So in this world where you have these high skills and these low skills, what happens is that from time to time you have these major disruptions in the labor market. Okay, and these major disruptions, what they do is they kind of change the inequality. So there's some existing inequality in the society, in the economy, between high and low skilled workers. And then there's some disruption that happens, and because of that, inequality sort of changes. So what do I mean by that? So let me kind of give you a kind of a sort of a classic example. So when computers became popular in kind of the early 80s, when people started using computers in offices, especially especially in the US. So that was sort of one major disruption. Why was it? Because what computers did is that it increased the demand for those workers who can use computers. Okay, so computers don't work on their own. You need people to operate computers. Okay, so and who are these people? These are people typically people with skills, with high skills. Okay, so what computers did is that they increased the demand for high skilled workers, and that led to a sizable increase in income inequality in sort of the early 80s. And this is something that has been documented by a lot of people. Okay, so there are these disruptions that happen from time to time. So what we thought, or what the question that we sort of asked is COVID-19 about to create another such disruption in the labor market? Okay, so can COVID-19 sort of create, or can COVID-19 do something similar to what this advent of computers did in the 80s? Okay, so why do we think that this COVID-19 might be very disruptive for the labor market? So in this post-COVID world, I mean, it's just been sort of 5 or 6 months, but like the world has changed, and it probably changed. Or the way sort of things are working now, the way the economies are functioning now. I mean, we might see these some of these to have long-lasting impacts. Okay, so some of these could be, I mean, if not permanent, but they might last for another few years or so. So this labor market divide, so as I said, like traditionally the labor market divide has been between high and low skilled workers. Okay, now in the post-COVID world, I think the important labor market, or the key labor market divide, is really between workers who can work remotely, meaning from their home, and workers who cannot. Okay, so there's some workers who can work remotely. They can just sit in their home with their laptop and whatever, or their phone, and continue to work. And then there are workers who can't do that, who have to go to their office, or who have to go to their workplace, wherever that is, to actually sort of carry out their to do their jobs. Okay, and this is something, and this is not like rocket science. I mean, you just look around and you see people doing different kinds of stuff, and you see that a lot of people, like what they're doing, and they cannot do those things, and they cannot carry out their work from home, whereas for a lot of other people, they can, right? So for example, an airline booking agent, okay, so someone who sort of you call a number, and that person takes your reservations. It does not really matter. It does not really matter where that person is located physically. Okay, the person could be in an office. The person could be in his or her home. Okay, so and that person could kind of continue to provide the services that are expected from him or her, without significant loss in quality. But look at the same industry or whatever, someone sort of who does something related, which is an airline pilot. I mean, an airline pilot has to go to the airport and then board the plane. Okay, so the occupation that this airline pilot is conducting, is carrying out, requires that person to be physically present in the workplace. So what COVID-19, or what is going to happen in the aftermath of COVID-19, and this is something I think we are already seeing, is that workers who belong to this latter group, so workers who belong to the group where you cannot really work from home, you have to go out, they're the ones who are going to lose out more. Everyone is going to lose out. I mean, most of the workers in the economy are going to lose out, but because there's some sort of aggregate effect, okay. But the losses are going to be much more for this second group of people, okay. All right, so let me sort of give you some numbers. So this is sort of a table from our paper. So so let me kind of explain what we're the information that is there in the table. So the first column, it says NOC codes. So NOC stands for National Occupational Classification. So what happens is that so we have we have a government agency. I think it's the Ministry of Labor. So they basically so they look at all the classifications and all the occupations that are being done by Indian workers, and then they classify these occupations into different categories. Okay, sort of very broad categories. Of course, under each of these categories, there are many sort of finer sort of occupations. So and then they assign a code. So of course, the codes don't tell us anything. Then we have to look at the title. So that's the second column in the table. Because the title sort of tells you what those occupation codes are. So for example, the first code, code 1, is for legislators, senior officials, and managers. Okay? It's sort of a group that combines like different kinds of people or people doing different types of stuff. But it is anyway. That's what the government did. Okay. Group 2 is professionals, and Group 8 is plant and machine operators. Group 9 is elementary occupations. So elementary occupations is this miscellaneous group that essentially has a lot of different occupations that don't really fit into any of the remaining categories. Okay, so whatever you can't fit in the other categories, you put them under elementary occupations. So there would be things like drivers, cleaners, sort of construction workers. Okay, so a lot of these, and they're typically workers who are providing some sort of manual kind of providing sort of manual service. Okay, or carrying out manual jobs. Okay, so the important thing here, which I sort of want to point out, is the third column. Okay, so the third column is skill. So what the Ministry of Labor sort of did is that they sort of took these occupations. Okay, let's see, for a slideshow, let me see. Okay, is this better?
Yes, font size is better now. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I know. I think for this table, I think that some of the numbers might appear very small. So, okay. So skill. Okay. So what does third column? What does it denote? So skill sort of refers to. Well, so it's okay. So how do they do that? So basically, what they do is that they create 4 groups for skills, 4 classification for skills. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you go through the column, there are basically 4 groups. So 1 is basically sort of primary education. So those workers who did not complete high school. 2 is secondary education. 3 is some undergraduate degree like bachelor's degree, and 4 is postgraduate degree. So people now, of course, even within any of these groups, there are you have different occupations and workers in different occupations. Of course, some of them might have completed high school, some of them might have completed undergraduate, like bachelor's, some might have completed postgraduate. So essentially, what they do is that on average, they try to compute that for each of these occupations, what is the corresponding skill level of the people who are carrying out these occupations. Okay, so on average, what is the skill level of professionals? Okay, so and that is from the data, it seems that most of them are postgraduates. Okay, and so what is the average skill level of service workers and sales workers? So the data says that it's category 2s, which means that they are typically they have typically a secondary education, but not more than that. They never went to. Most of them did not go to college. Okay, so that's how they create this. The fourth column is share. So this is basically the share of each of these occupations in India. Okay, so if you look at all these workers, if you look at all these occupations, then about 10% of the people who are employed in India belong to category 1, which is legislators, senior officials, and managers. Okay, about 5% belong to category 2. 4.6% belong to category 3. Okay, so this is these are the numbers for India. So this is the distribution of occupations, the distribution of workers in different occupations. Okay, the last column, okay, column 5, which is ETA. So that's really kind of the new thing here. Okay? So what we are sort of, which is going to play a very important role in our paper. So this number in some, so this it's a fraction, okay? So these are all, lying between 0 and 1. So this number sort of captures the fraction of workers in each of these employment groups who can work remotely. Okay, so if you look at the first occupation codes, like senior officials, managers, now, so there are many of them. Okay, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of such workers in the economy. Out of them, on average, about 34% can work from home. Okay, now this number, so this is something that we did not come up with. This is based on work done by other people. So they kind of look at these occupations and they try to, they have detailed information about what people in different occupations do, what sort of technology they use, and they've come up with these numbers. Okay, so so professionals or associate professions, for them, like the tendency to work from home or the ability to work from home is very high, or it's quite high. Okay, it's like 30%, 25%, something like that. Look at the occupations at the bottom of the table. So look at occupation code 8 or occupation code 9 or occupation code 7. Okay, so trade workers or machine operators or elementary occupations. So there, the ability of these workers to work from home is almost nil. Okay, so they'll find it very, very difficult to work from home because of the nature of their work, right? A bus driver cannot work from home. The bus driver has to go out and drive the bus. Okay, it's a very simple point. Okay, but this number is important. Okay, so what we see here is that if you classify workers according to different occupations, it seems that workers who are highly skilled are also have a higher ability to work from home. Workers who are low skill, typically low skill, don't really have an ability to work from home. They have to go out and work. Okay. All right. So now if you kind of look at if you sort of compare one economy sort of at the aggregate level with another economy. So let's say if you compare India with a country like United States, the fraction of workers who can work in India is typically much lower. So at the economy, so now we're not looking at individual occupations, we're looking at the entire economy. Okay, so the fraction of workers who can work in India is much lower than say US or France, Germany, UK, like any sort of developed country. And this is because of two factors. Okay, so the first factor is for any given occupation, the ability to work remotely is lower in India. So let's pick the occupation code 2, which is like professionals. Okay, so if you look at the professions in India and if you compare them with the professions in the United States, the professions in the US can actually are more likely to work from home or have a higher ability to work from home. And this is because of technology, because of how, because of the nature of work, the kind of equipments they use, the kind of technology they use. So for any given occupation, that's the case. But at the same time, in India, in a country like India, more people are engaged in occupations in which working remotely is difficult. Okay, so we know that there are these occupations like these occupation codes 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so machine operators, elementary occupations, salespersons. Okay, so these people generally cannot work from home or find it very difficult to work from home. And in India, in a country like India, a large fraction of the population is engaged in these occupations, a much smaller fraction compared to the United States, where or Germany, where a much smaller fraction is engaged in these kind of occupations. Okay, so both of these reasons can potentially drive a difference between how likely a worker in India, a typical worker in India, can work from home as opposed to a country like United States. Okay, so we did some sort of rough calculations, and what we found is that if you look at high-skilled workers in India, around on average, okay, 32 out of 100, so roughly 30% of high-skilled workers in India can work remotely. Again, you have to keep so the important word here is important phrase here is on average. So again, within occupation, there's a lot of heterogeneity. And if you look at professions, some professions find it very easy to work from home. Some professions may not find it very easy to work from home. But again, on average, about 30% of workers can work from home. Of high-skilled workers can work from home. What is the number, corresponding number for low-skilled workers? It's 4. Okay, so 4% of low-skilled workers in India can work from home. The remaining 96%, they can't. They have to go out. Otherwise, they don't earn a living. They cannot earn a living. Okay, so the difference is sort of stark. And so this is kind of this is really the motivation for our paper. So given this big difference, and given that COVID-19 will given this big difference, we think that COVID-19 will affect these two sets of workers, or these two groups of workers, very differently. Okay. All right. So so that's kind of introduction. So that's where we are coming from. So that was basically our thinking when when we decided to sort of write this paper. So now I'm going to get into the paper, and again, it's like I'm going to be sort of pretty brief. So I won't go into. I'm not going to show any math. I'm not going to show you like any questions or sort of anything as such because I don't really have time for that. But so I'll just give you kind of the main elements of the model, sort of the main sort of driving force of the model, the main mechanisms, and then I'll show you some results that will highlight the point that I'm trying to make, which is that inequality, that in this post-COVID world, income inequality can go up significantly. Okay. All right. So the model. So what is this economic model that we're using? So well, basically we're going to combine two models. Okay. So our paper basically combines two models. There's an economic model, and then there's another model that I'm going to talk about in the next slide. So essentially what we do is that we are going to embed something known as an SIR epidemiological model. Okay, so this is an epidemiological model is, so these are essentially models that are used by epidemiologists who are trying to study pandemics. Okay, so they sort of how will as a pandemic progresses, how will that affect the number of infected people? How will that affect how will infection sort of evolve over time? So these are typically models that are used in that literature, and these are being used like for a long time. So what we do is that we sort of take kind of a standard epidemiological model, and we combine it with sort of a standard macro model. So this is the type of macro model we use is known as a DSG, or dynamic stochastic general equilibrium model. So these are sort of standard models or standard frameworks used in macro. So we sort of embed an epidemiological model into a standard macro framework. Okay, so there are two types of agents. So as I kind of hopefully I've been sort of able to convince you that at the end of the day, what matters is whether you can work from home or not. And it seems that whether you can work from home or not really depends on your skills. So at the end of the day, it is really your skills. Okay, so in some sense, the new divide, the new labor market divide that we're talking about is actually quite related with the old labor market divide. So whether you can work from home or not really depends on whether you're high skilled or not. So we have these two types of agents in the economy: high skilled and low skilled. And we allow agents to work from home or work on site. Okay, remote working or on site working. So you can go to your office or you can work from home. And the way we sort of model this division is that we say that, look, compared to high-skilled workers, low-skilled workers are much less effective when they work from home. Okay, so that's sort of a way to model this inability of less skilled workers to work from home. Okay, so basically what we're going to say is that, look, if you're a low-skilled worker and you work from home, then your productivity suffers a lot. Your productivity declines a lot. Okay, so which means that you, like, working from home is not a very good option for you. And then agents in this economy, they can work and they also consume. Okay, so you also decide. So you work, you earn an income, and you decide, and then you basically spend that income. There's a consumption. There's a consumption component also. All right. So that was the economic model. So, and then there's the disease model. The disease model is this SIR epidemiological model. So, so what does SIR stand for? So why is it called SIR? So SIR basically stands for, so S stands for susceptible, I stands for infected, and R stands for recovered. Okay, so at any point in time, so once the pandemic starts, at any point in time, you have a fraction of the population that is susceptible, so they have not been infected. There's a fraction of the population that have been infected, okay, and that are currently infected. And then there's a fraction of the population who have recovered. Now, of course, there's a fourth category, which is the people who are deceased, who sort of pass away. But here, like what we do in our model is that we sort of combine this category of this disease category with the recovered category. So recovered here means that you were infected in the past and now you're not infected anymore. So either you are, so what that means is that you are still alive and you're sort of fine, or you did not make it. Okay, so you sort of. All right, so that's basically, so these are three categories. So now how can disease spread? In this economy, how can disease spread? So as I said, this is sort of an economic model. So disease can spread through consumption. So when you decide to consume, consumption requires or might require sort of going out. Okay, so you can go to a shop, you can go to a mall, you can go to a restaurant, a movie theater, whatever. Okay, so when you consume, when you go out for consumption, you can get infected because of that, because you're coming in touch with, you're coming in contact with other people. So if you decide to change or reduce your consumption, then that has an effect on how this disease sort of spreads. The thing that we kind of really want to focus on here is on-site work. So if you go to work, okay, if you go to work, then you expose yourself. You have there's this risk that you can get infected. Okay, so that would sort of influence your decision of whether you want to go to work or not. Now, of course, that combined with the fact that if you stay at home, there's an effect on income. Okay, so you're going to think about this. But if you go out to work, disease can spread through that. And then the third category is social interaction. So this is like whatever. If there's a certain amount of infected people in the economy and there's a certain amount of susceptible people in the economy, then at every point in time, people will get infected. I mean, you will at some point come in contact with others. Even if you're not infected yourself, at some point you'll come in contact with others who are infected and you contract the disease, okay? Now, these SIR models, kind of these pure SIR models that epidemiologists have been using in the past, they only had this third component, social interactions. Okay, so in those models they were not economic models, they were sort of pure models of disease spread. So they only had, so disease could spread only through social interactions. So what we do is that we introduce an economic component to this model. So we say that, look, individuals in this economy make decisions, economic decisions, and those decisions have consequences for how fast or how slow the infections spread. Okay, so that's something that we do. And anyway, we're not the only ones doing this. There are other papers that do similar stuff. Okay, that are doing using similar models. Okay, all right. So then so the question is, okay, so what is the worker doing? So the worker sort of essentially faces the following decision. So there's a trade-off. Okay, the workers will optimize. They will choose to do something optimally. And optimality essentially means that there's always a trade-off. So so there's a cost of doing something and there's a benefit of doing something. So you're going to balance the cost and the benefit. You're going to balance the marginal benefit of doing something with the marginal cost of doing the same thing. So what is the worker deciding to do? The worker, so on the one hand, the worker if the worker works remotely, then the chances of getting infected are lower. That sort of, it makes sense. But it also lowers income. Okay, if you work remotely, it lowers the income. But again, the effect of lower income is not the same for everyone. So there's some workers in the economy whose income may not actually go down at all, right? But there's some workers in the economy whose income will go down drastically if they choose to work from home. And then there are all these workers in between, because there's a heterogeneous effect of working from home on income. And that, as I argued earlier, is going to depend on skills. Okay? So whether you're high skill or low skill, it's going to, that will determine this choice. And lockdown. So when you impose a lockdown, by raising the cost of working on site. Okay, so we think of lockdown as imposing a cost of working on site. So you can't go out, you can't go to work or whatever. You have to maintain social distancing while working. Anything that raises your cost of working on site, it will affect this decision. It's going to influence your decision to work remotely or to work from home, or to work remotely or to work on site. Okay. All right. So what we do in the paper is we look at so we wrote this paper. Kind of the first draft of this paper was like in early April. I mean, we started writing the paper in sort of middle of March, just when the lockdown started, and then early April we kind of had sort of the first draft. And at that time we didn't really know. I mean, no one really knew how this thing is going to progress. No one really knew what the policy of the government would be like. So you go into lockdown. Like, how long will the lockdown last? It lasts for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for a month, for 2 months. Okay, so and maybe you have a lockdown, then you remove the lockdown, and again you impose a lockdown. So all these things. We were not really sure of at that point. There was a lot of uncertainty, and I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, but maybe slightly less. So what we did is that we looked at different components of different types of lockdown. So we looked at something called sustained lockdown, which is that you lock down the economy for an extended period of time, like a few months. Then we looked at something called staggered lockdown. So staggered lockdown is you lock down the economy. So there's a very serious lockdown for, let's say, 1 month. And then you ease things a little bit. Okay, so you allow some people to go out, and then that happens for another month. And then you ease restrictions a little bit more for another month. Okay, so you slowly, you start with a very severe lockdown, and you kind of make it less and less severe over time. We also looked at something called intermittent lockdown, which is that you impose a lockdown, and then you remove the lockdown and impose it again. So we're actually seeing something like this now. I mean, some states or some cities are doing intermittent lockdown. Okay? So impose lockdown, remove it, and then after a month, again impose lockdown and whatever. So I mean, no one really knows how to handle this, right? So governments are sort of trying out all kinds of policies. So we look at all these different scenarios. I won't have time to go through all of them. So what I'll do is I'll just focus on one. But anyway, I mean, qualitatively, the results are similar in all these situations. Okay. So I'm going to focus on just one scenario, which is a sustained lockdown. And I'm just going to, what I'll do is that I'll show you some graphs. The next couple of slides, I'll show you some graphs that I think sort of brings out the results, or shows the results in a very sort of clear and transparent manner. So essentially, so as I said, the nature of the lockdown that we're considering is sustained. So the left-hand side picture with sort of the black dotted line, so that's kind of lockdown. So we are looking at, along the horizontal axis, we're measuring the days. So starting from day 0. So in our sort of calculation, we were thinking of day 0 as 1st January, so the beginning of this year, and then it goes up to day 500. So sometime like the middle of next year or something. Okay? And sustained lockdown this is sort of a severe lockdown. So this is kind of basically what the way again sort of we model this is that we said, okay, government imposes a cost on site labor. So if you go out, it's going to be very costly for you to go out, okay, because of all these restrictions. So impose the cost, and then that cost sort of remains the same for an extended period of time, and then sort of goes down. So that's the nature of the lockdown. So now let's look at some of the results. So on the right hand side, picture on the right-hand side, you have, we're basically looking at on-site labor. So what happens to on-site labor compared to, so before lockdown, like there was a certain amount of like high-skilled and low-skilled workers were, were working for a certain number of hours every week. And now because of the lockdown, we expect it to go down. The question is by how much? So what we see here is that we're plotting the on-site labor for both high-skilled as well as low-skilled workers. So the blue line is high-skilled, the red dotted line is low-skilled, the red dashed line is low-skilled. So for low-skilled workers, it goes down. It goes down a little bit because there are restrictions, so it's not that easy for you to go out. For high-skilled workers, it goes down a lot. And again, the idea here is that, look, high-skilled workers, because of what they do, because of the nature of their work, they can, or many of them can afford to just stay at home and continue working. I mean, in our profession, like professors, teachers, whatever, we continue to teach, from our like home or whatever, right? So we can continue to provide the same kind of services with, pretty much the same kind of quality without, just from our home, without having to go to a classroom and teach in front of, a lot of students. Okay, and this is true for a lot of occupations, a lot of professions. But for low-skilled workers, that is a luxury. And most low-skilled workers cannot do that. They have to kind of go out. So sure, there is an effect. We do see a slight cutback or slight reduction in on-site labor coming from low-skilled workers, but they still continue to go out. They will continue to go out despite these costs. Okay. Now, so I sort of talked about inequality. I've been sort of talking about income inequality. One of the interesting things that comes out of this paper is that there's another inequality. So there's the inequality between high and low skilled workers increases not just in terms of income, but it also increases in terms of health outcomes. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So this is a picture of infections. Okay. So how the infections, again, this is something that comes out these epidemiological models. Okay, so so you might have, I'm sure all of you have seen at some point sort of graphs that kind of look like this. So as the pandemic sort of progresses, infections will sort of go up. It will kind of hit a peak, and then it sort of come down. So I have two pictures here. So the left-hand side corresponds to infections for the high-skilled workers, and the right-hand side corresponds to infection for the low-skilled workers. And again, so this is where along the horizontal axis, we're looking at the number of days. Along the vertical axis, we're measuring everything as a percentage of the initial population. Okay, so 10 here means that 10% of the initial population is infected. Okay, 5 means 5% of the initial population is infected. So if you look at the first picture, so the green line corresponds to the benchmark. So the benchmark is basically where there is no lockdown. Okay, so suppose the government did not do anything, how would the pandemic kind of play out? And so it sort of has this bell shape. It goes up and sort of comes down. Now this paper we sort of wrote, as I said, like we wrote it sort of in late March, and so if you kind of look at the scale, like if you look at the horizontal scale, it says that the infections, in the absence of any kind of government intervention, the infections would sort of peak after roughly 220 or 230 days. So that's around late July, early August. So we are sort of at that period, but I don't think we have peaked yet. But anyway, at that point, whatever, I mean, this is what our models will predict. Now what happens when you impose this lockdown? The curve moves down. Okay, so this is the flattening of the curve that epidemiologists have been sort of talking about. That if you impose a lockdown, you can flatten the curve, and it sort of flattens dramatically. Okay, so it sort of goes down for the high-skilled workers. It goes down dramatically again because many of them are switching to working from home. Okay, the picture on the right is the same, but now for low-skilled workers. Now, what you see is that for low-skilled workers, again, there is a flattening of the curve, but it's much less pronounced. Okay, so there is a reduction in infections, and as a fraction of the population, it's much less compared to high-skilled workers. So this is the second inequality. So there's an inequality in income, and then there's a second inequality, which is in health outcomes. So because low-skilled workers are going out, they're forced to go out to earn their livelihood, they're also exposing themselves to greater risk. They're also more likely to get infected. So there's a difference in income outcome, in income inequality. There's difference in their incomes, but there's also difference in their health outcomes, okay? So that these two inequality that sort of, that increases because of the pandemic. All right, and I'm sort of almost done. So the last picture, so this is, so in the left-hand side of the picture, so the graph on the left-hand side, so here we are measuring output. Again, so we're looking at sort of deviations from whatever there was before the pandemic. So these are all, you can read them as, you can read the graph as percentage decline in output from, whatever there was before the pandemic. So again, the green line corresponds to the benchmark and the black line corresponds to containment. Containment means there's some policy in place. So if the government did not do anything, output would have still gone down, and that is because there's still, some people would still have chosen not to go out and work from home, and that would have an effect on productivity and output. But in the presence of this lockdown, when you make it much more costly for people to go out, the effect on output is much more severe. So the black dashed line, you can see that it sort of lies completely below the green line, and the numbers are big. It's like, so this model sort of predicts, at least in, if you think of this as a model of manufacturing and services, if you're looking at only manufacturing services, there's like maybe a 70%, well, I mean, it's not a 70% total decline in output, but at the peak of the infection, the output could be less than what it should have been, or what it would have been, by about 30%, okay? 30% less, okay? And the last picture, which is the picture on the right, so that's inequality. So that is what I've been sort of talking throughout. That's income inequality. So income inequality goes up, and it sort of goes up significantly. So essentially, as soon as the lockdown goes into place, inequality sort of jumps up, and then over time, as infections sort of spread, inequality sort of starts to go up, and it sort of peaks at some point, and it sort of starts to come down. And again, this is sort of happening because the low-skilled workers, they're also choosing optimally whether they want to go out or not. So when it's very likely, so when infections are going up, they also choose, many of them are choosing not to go out, but that has consequences for their income. Their income is getting a huge hit. But as infections start to come down, they're also sort of going out, more, and that sort of brings down. And then when you remove the lockdown, you can go back to where you started. Of course, I mean, now we know, again, we wrote this in early April. Now we know that even when you sort of remove lockdown, I mean, like even if you remove sort of these government policies, things are not going to be the same. Like these social distancing, all this will be in place for many, many months to come, and that will continue to have sort of permanent effect. Okay, all right. So I think I saw a question which is saying that why is income inequality a flat line before? Well, it's not the flat line does not mean there's no income inequality. There is income inequality, and what we are talking here is how does income inequality change after the pandemic relative to what it was before. Even before there was some inequality, okay, but because of the pandemic it increases. So relative to whatever there was before, it just goes up. And so once you remove the lockdown, it will eventually come down at some point. Okay, so that's the idea. Okay, so I am. So that's basically. I took a little longer than what I wanted to. So conclusion. Again, I want to sort of to make a couple of quick points. So income inequality is about to worsen considerably. I mean, it has already worsened, and in the months to come, as I said, things are not going to go back to normal in the near future. We are months away from a development of a vaccine, and even if there's a vaccine, it will take again a long time to sort of distribute it and get it and sort of get people vaccinated. So at least till that point, the situation that I just highlighted is going to persist. So that will have a serious consequence on inequality. Okay, And evidence, so we don't really have evidence from India at this point, because in India, like, sort of data is kind of an issue here. Like getting high quality data is a bit problematic. It's not easy. But in the US, economists have already started looking at this, and they already have some preliminary data from March, April, and May. And it seems that the effects that I talked about in this paper, in this presentation, those are already being seen. So, for example, in the US, what they're finding is that if you look at different groups in the population, African Americans, okay, they have been affected disproportionately more because of the pandemic. Okay, so they are the ones whose income has gone down much more compared to, let's say, white Americans. And one reason for that is that African Americans tend to be, like on average, they tend to be lower skilled than white Americans. So they tend to be engaged in jobs and occupations that require you to be, you to go to your office or go to your, sort of place of work. Okay? And we are seeing effects of that. At least in some countries, and I think at some point, when data sort of starts coming out for India, maybe towards the end of the year, I'm pretty sure we're going to see the effects for India as well. Okay, policy, well, I think it requires a lot of government support. Government support, sort of a specific kind of support. So support towards low-skilled workers. So people who are unable to go out, who are unable to sort of carry out their jobs from their home. Thing is, if you are, so what is happening right now is that they are forced to go out, and when they're forced to go out, you're also exposing them to higher risk, and that is not fair. I mean, like, compared to high-skilled workers, low-skilled workers they're exposing themselves to higher risk just because of what they do, just because of the nature of their work. So how do you alleviate this? How do you reduce this? Well, you have to give them income support. So that's kind of the policy prescription. Okay, so I have taken enough time, so I'm going to stop here. And yeah, thank you for listening to me very, very patiently. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kunal Dasgupta, for your interesting presentation. Your paper is very much interesting, and you have discussed about income inequality, skill distribution, and you have also discussed COVID-19 and lockdown, how skill distribution has done occupational distribution regarding working from home. And you also work on SIR model, that is epidemiological model, which is very much interesting and new. And also you have put focus on infection due to high skilled workers and low skilled workers. And I thank you once again for your presentation. And let us take few more questions, some questions for you. One question is from Chandrakanto Saha. He has asked, how can we measure the ability to work from home?
Yeah, so yeah, that's of course a very important, I mean, sort of a fundamental question. So we did not do that. So that's something I sort of showed you this table that kind of has information on this ability to work from home for different occupations. So this has been done by a few other researchers. So what they do is that they have sort of very detailed information on what people do. So people who are engaged in the different occupations, what exactly is it that they're doing, and what sort of tools, what sort of equipments, what sort of technology they use. And typically, I think this is sort of very closely related to the usage of computers. Okay, so people who tend to use a lot of computers for their work, they are more likely to be able to work from home. People whose job does not involve the use of computers, they would find it much more difficult to work from home. So that's kind of the basic idea. But then these guys, they sort of go out and measure these things in a lot of detail. And we basically take the numbers from them. But of course, you have to do it. So this is the way you sort of do the ability to work from home.
Sir,
yes.
One more question. Arindam Das, from Arindam Das, who says, I think mobile networks are becoming a big barrier to working from home. Although the current situation is new to us, and I think over time we will overcome this adversity? What do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I guess there are two parts to your question. One is that mobile barriers are kind of a problem, or mobile network is kind of a problem, and then when is do I think that we'll overcome this? So first, yes, I agree. I mean, this is something we are facing. I face all the time. So we are, I think in a lot of places we have moved to online teaching. So at IIM Bangalore, we are doing the same thing. We've already started teaching, and we're doing everything like meetings and teaching. Everything is happening online. And yeah, I mean, we face this issue all the time. I mean, I see, like I taught this morning, and then some students suddenly sort of got locked out or whatever, because it's connection dropped. So this is an issue. But yeah, I think going forward, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is, now that, this mobile or whatever, like internet is going to play such an important component in our lives. I think there's going to be a lot of investment to try to improve the quality of these. Now, having said that, I should also say, as I also mentioned, because this is something, I think a lot of people have been discussing about, another way in which inequality is shaping up in India is actually through these mobile or because of these mobile networks. So mobile connection or internet connection or internet connectivity is not the same for everyone. And again, if you sort of try to look at kind of data, you'll see that there will be some sort of a strong correlation between the quality of connectivity and, let's say, your income and your skills. Okay, so people who are highly skilled, they have higher income, they can afford very high quality mobile or whatever, they can afford to spend a lot on mobile connectivity. People who are low skilled, I mean, you go to rural areas and it's like, I mean, the connectivity is very poor. So again, so this, the fact that mobile connectivity is not the same across for everyone, this is another source of inequality. So, and that is something that is being felt a lot in education. So students, I mean, we have students at IIM Bangalore, we have students who live in big cities, and we have students who live in small towns. We have some students who live in villages, and their ability to sort of connect, to sort of log in to our classes and listen to lectures is not the same. And so that, I think, is another problem. But that sort of also says that we need to do a lot more. We need to, I mean, the government really needs to work, and the private players need to work to improve the quality of mobile networks.
There are one more question.
Yeah.
From Ritika Ghosh and Pujya Ghoshal, both are similar in nature. So I may say that what may be the government policies? The question is, what may be the government policies that would lessen the growing inequality in India due to COVID crisis?
So yeah, so this is something I kind of, I think I sort of spoke very brief. I sort of just mentioned very briefly in the last slide. So it has to be government transfer because look, I mean, the thing is, the kind of work that a lot of these low-skilled workers are doing, the kind of work that they engage in, I mean, you cannot come up with a technology that will allow them to work from home. That is not an option. As a person who drives a cab, I mean, that person cannot stay at home. That person has to go out, right? So if you want that person not to go out and expose themselves to risk, and of course, also the fact that even when you go out these days for someone like a cab driver, I mean, no one is getting on the cab. So no, even if you go out, like who's going to get on your cab? So the only thing, the only solution here is transfer from the government and large scale. So in the paper, we we looked at these different, these lockdown scenarios that I kind of talked about, and then of course the inequality. In different scenarios, you get different kind of inequality numbers. But again, we sort of did a very sort of rough calculation, and the number that we got is, if the government wants to prevent this inequality from going up, income inequality from going up, it needs to spend somewhere between 0.2% to 0.5% of GDP. Okay, so that would be, I don't know, maybe something like, I don't know, 30, 40,000 crores, some numbers sort of along those lines. But yeah, I mean, there's really no other way, because you cannot come up with a technology, any technology that will solve this problem. It has to be monetary transfers.
One more question is there from P. Radhakrishnan.
All right.
Sir, will you please explain the economic impact on India, which needs to assess consequent to shape of the shock and its structural litigation of its nature and extent of the disease burden, and how it is possible to recreate India without FE from the privacies at large weakened India.
Sorry, how can we? So I didn't understand the very last part.
How is it possible to recreate India without FE? I think I hope it is further effect or something like that. FE from the privacies at large. Privacies of privacies.
Oh, okay. Well,
Once more I repeat.
No,
Sir, will you please explain the economic impact on India, which needs to be assessed consequent to shape of the shock and its structural legal of its nature and extent of the disease burden?
Okay, so I think I mean it's sort of very. I mean, I think it's sort of
very long question.
Yeah, very broad. No, it's also kind of a very sort of broad question, and I mean, I think there are. So I mean, I think there are the few things that we have learned from this. I mean, I think there are a few lessons to learn from this, and I think if we acknowledge, if we acknowledge these, I mean, we have realized that our economic, there's certain drawback, there's certain structural problems in the economy, and if we acknowledge these, then maybe we can do a better job of, we'll do a better job of fixing, maybe trying to fix some of these, and hope that if something like this happens in the future, then then we are in a better position. So I think one of the things that we have, the two things. I mean, one is healthcare. Right? I mean, our healthcare system is terrible. I mean, it's like, I think it's something we always knew, but I think the COVID-19 has sort of brought it out very, very clearly. I mean, the public healthcare system is really, I mean, there's really a lot that needs to be done. Maybe some states do better than others, but still, I mean, there's much more. I mean, much more investment that is required. So in terms of healthcare expenditure as a share of GDP, India has has one of the lowest figures among sort of the major economies. So that is something we need to work on. And the other thing is, we don't have a social safety net. Again, this is not something that it's not something that that's unique to India. I mean, developing countries typically don't have social safety nets. I mean, because we typically, it is very expensive for us to provide, sort of these. But so what I mean by social safety nets is that if you go to the developed countries, if you go to countries in Western Europe, countries in North America, they have something called unemployment insurance. So what is unemployment insurance? So basically, when you are earning, when you have an income, you basically every month, along with your income tax, you pay a certain amount to the government, which is like an insurance. So this is insurance that you're paying in the event that you get unemployed. Okay, so just like any insurance, so the idea about insurance is that the basic idea is that every month I'm going to pay some sort of premium. So I have a health insurance, every month I pay a premium, so that when I actually get very sick, then I get a lot of money from the insurance company to help me out, okay? Unemployment insurance, the idea is the same. So every month when I have a job and I'm actually earning, I pay a small premium to the government. And this is to the government, okay? Not to some company, I pay it to the government. And when I lose my job, the government actually pays me, okay? So if I'm unemployed for a few months, the government, during that time, the government will pay me a salary, will give me an income, okay? So a lot of these, the countries that do these, they're typically called like welfare states. They do a lot of other things. So healthcare is typically sort of very cheap, or many of these countries it's free. But there's also unemployment insurance. India, we don't have that. In India, you unemployed, it's like fend for yourself. The government will not do anything for you. Okay. And in a situation like this, in pandemic, so when you think about the developed countries, and every country has been affected, but in a lot of developed countries, the situation is not as bad as here because they have unemployment insurance. So at least for the first few months, when a lot of workers lost their jobs, the government sort of took care of them. Here we don't have that. I mean, here, a low-skilled person or any person loses their jobs, they have to fall back on the savings or this, or the family members. And for poor people, I mean, they have no savings. I mean, most of them are probably indebted. Okay, so these are things. These are sort of major drawbacks that maybe we don't usually talk about, and no one really worries about these things. But I think the pandemic sort of has brought these things to the forefront, and maybe going forward, these are things that we need to work on. So maybe some sort of unemployment insurance scheme for workers, and definitely trying to invest more on our healthcare system to sort of raise the capacity as well as the quality of our healthcare system.
One more question is there.
Yes.
And this is the final question.
Okay.
Question from Shantanu Ghosh, head of the department,
Okay.
College, head of the department of economics.
All right.
He asks, developed countries with better technology can offer greater scope of work from home or from remote locations. Will it then rise global inequality across nations?
That's actually a very good point. It should, right? I mean, if you think about it, so now if you just don't look at, let's say, high-skilled workers in India versus high-skilled, low-skilled workers in India. Now, if you compare workers in India versus workers in, let's say, US or Canada or United Kingdom, if you look at this entire population of workers, yeah. And I think there's been some, I mean, although we have not looked at kind of poverty per se, but there are some studies that seem to suggest that global poverty is going to go up tremendously. So, and it's very unfortunate because in these last couple of decades, like in this century, between 2000 and 2020, I think the world had made tremendous progress in terms of reducing absolute poverty. So a lot of people had been sort of brought out of poverty, like abject poverty. And this pandemic, I think, is going to turn the clock back, and a lot of people will sort of slide back into poverty. And so if you look at the entire world population in that respect, I think it's going to increase. It should, I mean, it has to increase inequality at the global level. So that is, I mean, I did not think about it, but I think that's that's kind of like spot on. I think that's a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta.
Thank you
for your nice presentation.
Thank you.
And I hope I will give vote of thanks now. So,
but before that, I think on behalf of the department and college, I must express our gratitude and immense thanks to Dr. Dasgupta for a brilliant presentation, a presentation which is full of theoretical issues. And I think those who are interested in rigorous theoretical work on COVID-19 and economic crisis, for them it has given a lot of windows. So yes, it is still at the nascent stage, as you have said, but I hope we can do a lot of work on this field. And we are really grateful that even after a 2.5-hour marathon session with your IIM students, you have spared so much time for us. Thank you. And we look forward to your future participation again. We will bother you again.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. Now, Baringo will wrap up.
Okay, we have already come to the back end of the webinar session. So, for the vote of thanks, I may thank all the participants and all the members of the webinar committee for their wonderful job. And we have been successfully organized our one-day national webinar on the topic, the COVID-19 economic crisis, by the Department of Economics in collaboration with IQAC, Maulana Azad College. For this, first of all, I thank our principal of Maulana Azad College, Dr. Subhasis Datta, for his enthusiasm and encouragement to organize such a webinar. I express my gratitude to both of our speakers, Professor Ovirup Sarkar and Dr. Kunal Dasgupta, for their excellent presentation. We are grateful to them because they have joined our webinar as resource persons. And I hope we shall get them in our college physically present after this pandemic situation will be over. And I welcome both. I thank our IQAC coordinator, Professor Suvit Dasgupta, for his continuous support to make this webinar success. I also thank our head of the department, Shantanu Ghosh, for his continuous involvement to make this webinar a success. I also thank all the members of the webinar organizing committee, especially to Samudra Prasad Boni, Abhishek Ghosh, Subhajit Samanto, and all the computer personnel, those who are involved, uh, because without their effort, we could not have organized such type of webinar. I thank all the delegates who are present in this webinar, all the scholars, students, and all the participants. I must thank Bipasha Roy for her marvelous anchoring. I thank you everybody once again. Thank you all. Over to Shantanu.
So thank you all again. I think it is lunchtime. We should not detain people long. So only thing is that in this virtual seminar, we cannot provide lunch. Had it been in the college, but hopefully in near future, we would have physical seminars again. So till then, have a nice time. And thank you, Dr. Kunal Dasgupta, again. And we hope to be in touch. And I think some participants will now chase you.
One more announcement is here. The feedback link will be sent to all the participants in their email. So you check your email and fill up the feedback form. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we should stop here and quit. Yes. Dr. Kunal Dasgupta?
Yes.
Please break for lunch.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Thank you. I will not detain you.
Okay. Thank you.
It has been a marathon session today for you since 10. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all the delegates. Okay.